Esta es Onda UNED. We are Onda UNED present at the ICDE 2023 and having much more discussions about the future of education. And it's a pleasure to move ourselves to the south of Africa, an area we have usually very little contact with. And we have Mr. Paul Mr. Paul Gundani. It's a pleasure to have Mr. Paul Gundani from the Open University of Zimbabwe. A very beautiful country. You may know Victoria Falls. Well, Victoria Falls, the bigger part of Victoria Falls is in Zimbabwe, so that's something you may know much more Zimbabwe about. And it's a pleasure also to discuss because these are young countries that are creating many new things and facing many challenges that can be also common to us. So it's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Paul. And maybe we were discussing prior to going on air about the situation of how COVID changed our lives, and it was a challenge for our university. So maybe you can talk about a little bit about the history of the Open University of Zimbabwe, and then when COVID came, what happened?
Thank you very much. The history of my university begins in 1999 when the Zimbabwe Open University was founded by an act of parliament. And so we are turning 25 next year. And in the first 20 years, right up to 2019, we were basically a distance university, relying mostly on hard copy modules. But from 2019, we have shifted from hard copy modules to part online, or what we call electronic learning. So we call ourselves now Open Distance and Electronic Learning, or DEL. And that shift occurred because we realized that in the 21st century, it is important to stop printing hard copies because it is not environmentally friendly. We need to reduce the carbon footprint. We need to have a much more eco-friendly environment for all the citizens of the globe. And we need to embrace technologies of the 21st century. And our students have to be at the same level with other global students who are able to use technologies to promote their learning. So from 2019, when we went ODEL, Open Distance Electronic Learning, with a hybrid approach. And this hybrid consists of first contact lessons, contact tutorials, where we meet physically with our students. And then we also have the electronic, of course, which is both synchronous and asynchronous. We use our laptops, we use the phone, mobile phone, we use WhatsApp platforms, and so forth and so on. And these have been the models that we have been using. Now, when COVID came in 2020, our thinking was that we were already advanced in terms of electronic learning. And we should have been the university to assist 12 other universities in the country to embrace electronic learning. But things went much faster than we anticipated. Government came in with funding and started funding contact universities actually to go into electronic learning much faster than us.
So they kind of moved the funding to other universities
Yes,
and not
and
to
not
you.
to us. And so after COVID, the post-COVID situation has created a lot of competition for us, to the extent that the numbers we used to have before COVID are now shrinking. We used to have in each semester about 20,000 students. Now we are down to 15,000 per semester. So our numbers are shrinking. And it means that the competition which was brought in has actually been to our disadvantage and detriment. And we have to find a way of re-engineering our organization, our university, to claim back the space that we had. And this requires a lot of thinking. It requires a lot of infrastructure investment, particularly in all the regions, because we have 10 regions in the country. Each province has a regional campus. And then we are now trying to move from the regional campus to district, so that we have district centers in every district, 67 districts of the country. I think if we are able to do that, of course, it takes investment in terms of human capital. It means appointing more people to support teaching and learning in those districts.
You are funded by the government.
We are.
How you see the willingness of the government to fund all of this?
It's a difficult thing for government to be funding us. They are actually calling upon us to be creative, to fundraise on our own, so that we are not dependent on government. Well, the reason is very clear. With 13 universities for a population of 15 million, it's almost one university per million. That's the situation in Zimbabwe. And we are not including the technical colleges, technical and vocational colleges. It's just universities we are talking about, 13 of them. These are public universities. We have more private universities who are also competing for the same market.
It's crazy.
Yes, it is. So funding is not the strongest point for our government. We have to go out and look for funding on our own, and it is not that easy, particularly when our economy is developing at 3.1%. And many people
I
are
remember
unemployed.
even Zimbabwe had like a serious economical crisis short ago, wasn't it?
That is still the situation now. We are picking up gradually. We are getting much better. But still, our country has become deindustrialized a lot. Industry left since 2000 because of the land, transformation around land redistribution in the country. And the new government from 2018 is trying to lure investment and foreign direct investment particularly, but it takes time to build confidence globally so that you can have industries, big industries and firms come to the country and have more people being employed. So the economy has become very, very highly informalized. We have informal sector is much bigger than the formal sector. And therefore, the income of citizens is still very low at basic level.
Yeah. I remember hearing that in the African context, for example, even local countries like Rwanda and Nigeria were investing in other countries of the continent because they have, especially Rwanda, I think, has a strong technology sector. Also, actors like, I think, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia are financing some projects, even China, India as well. How is the likeliness of maybe one of these sort of partners to kind of improve the economy of Zimbabwe?
Yes, we had the late President Robert Mugabe who decided that the Western world is not happy with our land reform, and they have withdrawn foreign direct investment, and there are some sanctions imposed against our country. So he decided to move east. So the policy that he adopted, he called it move face east. And China became a very, very important player in that. Yes, China has come in, but remember, China has its own model of operation. They focus on minerals, especially in Zimbabwe, because we have so many minerals.
Yeah, you're reaching that.
We are
aren't
very
you?
rich in minerals. But the problem with the Chinese model is that instead of creating employment, most of the times they bring their own labor, and they don't employ the locals. And that is problematic. And of course, they also take raw materials and refine the material back in
Elsewhere.
China.
Yeah.
So the benefit for Zimbabwe is not that much. But the new government, which we call the Second Republic, has started to open up to all global players, not just those in the East like China. So for now, for instance, our country is trading very closely with Belarus. They are also trading with Russia. They are trading with, just a few days ago, South Korea, Japan. You have South Africa and other countries in the West, those that are willing to work with us. So it's now an open approach without necessarily favoring the Eastern countries. And it is bearing fruit gradually. I think it takes time to build confidence. And it is out of that confidence that we are starting to see the growth rates of the country increasing. Yes, Rwanda, we are cooperating very closely with Rwanda. We actually have teachers, Zimbabwean teachers, teaching from high school right up to universities and polytechnics.
They come from Rwanda.
From Zimbabwe to Rwanda. They are teaching in Rwanda. Because Rwanda has adopted English as a language, away from French. And they want English teachers, for instance. But we also have a very, very big trained human capital base in Zimbabwe. In terms of since independence 43 years ago, our human capital development has been very, very great. Our literacy rate is very, very high. And other countries that need this human capital, like South Africa and Rwanda, and the neighboring in the Southern African Development Cooperation countries, they actually use Zimbabwean labor a lot.
We're going to just change microphone. Okay. Just a little glimpses with the audio, but and it's very interesting because the history, as far as I remember, of Zambia and Zimbabwe as Rhodesia, which was the colonial name, is that Rhodesia was basically like a private sort of almost like a company that owned the country, wasn't it? So change the mindset of the people from that imposing of being almost a colony that was a company as well,
yes,
into we're going to take the development of our own hands, is quite hard. How is the role of a university like yours into also changing, not only teaching people things, but changing the mindset as well?
Yes, the Zimbabwe as a modern nation state started under a company, the British South Africa Company under Rhodes. Rhodes used to be Prime Minister in the Cape Colony in South Africa, Cecil John Rhodes. But from 1923, then it transitioned from being ruled by a company to becoming almost like a dominion state, like what Canada and Australia did, which is semi-autonomous rule. And in Rhodesia, it was called responsible government from 1923. And of course, it continued to be under the British colony right up to 1980. And so for you to situate the place of higher education in Zimbabwe Open University, particularly, you are looking at a situation at independence in 1980 where there was a bottleneck system. Very few black people were educated. They were supposed to be cheap labor in a colonial state. And the mandate of the government of independence was to open up from a bottleneck system and then, of course, to massify education. And massification is lovely. It means that more and more people have access to education and up to higher education. And Zimbabwe Open University was actually introduced and instituted as a way of massifying access to higher education in a country where there were very few. We started at independence with one university. By 1990, 3 universities. 1999, Zimbabwe Open University was meant to then increase access and make sure that the
furthest away people with...
Yes, the people from remote corners of the country access higher education. And there is therefore the social justice mandate that everyone has a right to higher education. And that is the space that Zimbabwe Open University then filled in. But now we have 13 public universities. More were created in the last 43 years, and a lot more private universities, particularly church-run universities. There are so many in Zimbabwe.
Oh,
the
like
churches are running religious universities. Yes. So the challenge, of course, for government is then to say, by increasing access, we open up possibilities and potential for everyone. However, government does not have enough funding, enough capital to be funding every student, because now we are talking of hundreds of thousands in universities. And this is where private players have to come in, and also families have to pool resources to support their children. Mm-hmm. And this is the situation where we are. Even at Zimbabwe Open Universities, we have very few scholarships, if any. The subsidy that government pays goes to our salaries, the salaries for academic and non-academic staff, but not so much for scholarships for students. So families are left to fend for themselves and to pay for their education. That affects access.
Completely. Well, before the on-air conversation started, we were talking that another issue, well, you already talk about funding and how scholarships are not there, is the money you pay to study at the Open University, is that relatively a high payment? So that means that it's not affordable for a very low economy family.
The issues that we deal with as management is to look at sustainability. Mm-hmm. As a university with 10 regions, and it means that we have 11 campuses. And those 11 campuses require funding for physical infrastructure, for teaching and learning to happen, For staff offices, you also need ICT infrastructure, which is very, very important. And the fees that we charge is relatively competitive, so that we are able to run the university without the intervention of state. So the fees are quite high for an ordinary person. I can say something like $400 per year. That's not cheap.
And that, taking into account the income of the country, is quite a high amount.
It is quite a higher amount. If you are looking at $400 per semester, that is quite a high amount for a country where unemployment is very, very high, for an economy where the informal sector is dominant more than the formal sector. It means you have people who are trying to bring food over their table through informal means, and it is not easy to raise $400 for education, for prioritization of education, because they will think first about their food on the table. They will think about shelter. They will think about other basic needs. And in the process, education becomes marginalized. That is a challenge.
You were talking prior to this conversation about internet access and power access, which is something maybe in Costa Rica we are not used to discuss about power, because that's pretty stable even in very far away places of our country, but it's not the case in Zimbabwe. So power, people are studying, and then suddenly the electric current goes off and you are left without access to power, and I guess internet will be also an issue.
Yes.
So maybe talk about that.
When you look at the Zimbabwean case, we have hydroelectric power from a huge dam, which was for years the largest man-made dam in the world. It's called the Kariba Dam. There is power which is generated through hydroelectric means, and that power is shared between Zambia and Zimbabwe.
It's in the border, in the Zambezi River.
It is in the Zambezi River. And so we share with Zambia. Because of climate change, the water levels have been going lower and lower recently. And the generation capacity has become compromised. So there is a challenge. We also have other forms of power, particularly coal-driven. So it's fossil-based. And of course there is a problem with coal-driven in the 21st century. But we still have got support from the Chinese to upgrade the generation of this coal-driven power, but that is not enough. So government has pushed for other forms of power generation, private, solar, so clean energy. But that policy has not generated much. We still have little which has been loaded on the grid. So power is a problem, particularly in a growing economy. And therefore, the power company tries to share this resource as equitably as possible by load shedding. Load shedding is you look at the power available and then you provide it to one sector where it is needed as a critical, for critical operations, and then you shut off the other side. So domestic usage is affected. For something like 12 hours a day, you don't have the power.
My goodness.
And it means that you can't have internet, you can't have your Wi-Fi when you don't have power. Meanwhile, you are trying to learn, but without power, you can't have the internet.
So you have to go with data, with mobile.
Yes, but then the data is expensive. In our country, we have a private player, a big private player, which sells data, and so we call them an internet supplier. But then you have two big government suppliers, internet suppliers. But again, only 3 for a population of 15 million. That's not enough. So the data is quite expensive. And an ordinary person is not able to sustain data to download teaching and learning material. That is the problem. We have to find a better way of enabling our students to learn most of the time offline and not online.
Even
And
though
that
they are
is the-
doing electronical means.
Exactly.
Well, a very interesting conversation. Maybe to be like wrapping up, what ideas do you bring back to Zimbabwe from this gathering we have had, and how important it is for you to come to these events and maybe go out of the problems of the day and think larger?
Thank you very much for that question. ICDE is very, very important for us. Remember, the African continent hosted it in 2015 in South Africa at Sun City, because we appreciate the importance that it brings to all of us as partners in education. For Zimbabwe, I would say, and for Zimbabwe Open University, it is always very, very useful for us to interact and engage with colleagues to share best practice. The lectures that I've already listened to have spoken to the importance of open educational resources, which we need. They have also spoken to artificial intelligence. For instance, this morning's lecture focused on artificial intelligence, and another spoke about Moodle. And we have also adopted Moodle at Zimbabwe Open University for more than 10 years. But for us to make the best of Moodle, it's important that we access open access tools,
So you don't have to pay the...
so that we don't have to pay the money which we don't have. You see, so open access becomes very, very important. And when you listen to others and you share experiences and you network, you go back better. And we would want to leverage from this network that we are making at this very, very important conference indeed. I think that is the best way to push the agenda of not just Zimbabwe Open University, but the agenda of the whole country of Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Gundani from the Open University of Zimbabwe. And listening to a country I've always wanted to go. Definitely, it's a very interesting place. And hear the voices from other places of the world always opens the mind. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much.
Well, this has been one interview more we have had at Onda UNED. We go back to our studio, and well, thank you very much for joining us at all of this very interesting conversation. See you.